the fall equinox that is coming precisely at 4:02 p.m. this Friday, the 22nd of September. It's that moment when the plane of the Earth's equator crosses the center of the sun's disk. Now, if you don't understand what that means, it means that's the moment when the sun shines equally on the northern and southern hemisphere. It's also the time when we tend to say that summer has ended and fall has begun. So I want to thank Victor and Dave for bringing some music that really did feel like that. I saw the leaves floating down laconically, and it brings up a different pace of our life. So, on Friday at 4:02, you can remember, take a moment to just think about our incredible journey through the universe and through the seasons that we experience, and maybe send out a little thank you to those scientists living today and in the past that have helped us understand our place in the universe. Have a good equinox, passing of time, moving onward. This is also the week of Peace Day Philly. For those of you who've been around, you know that we've been celebrating this in various ways for a number of years. Lisa, right there, Parker, started. Lisa, wave your hand. Thank you very much, Lisa. Peace Day Philly marks the United Nations International Day of Peace, and actually around this country people look at the Peace Day Philly work and use that as an example, so it's a testament to Lisa's work. It's basically a time to call for global peace. There are some events listed on the sheet that was in your program today. Please try to come to some or all of those events if you will. I dedicate the talk that I'm giving today to all of you here at the Ethical Society trying to make the world just a little bit more peaceful, trying to be an activist. I also dedicate it to those people who inspired you. And I asked some of you that question, who inspired you? Many of you were inspired by Gandhi and King and Mandela, Thich Nhat Hanh, Rosa Parks and Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Deepak Chopra. Some of you were inspired by people that I learned about for the first time, including singer and activist Angelique Kidjo from Benin, Maggie Kuhn of the Grey Panthers, and Angel Kyoto Williams, author and Zen priest. Many of you also admire local activists and teachers here like Sonia Sanchez or Taya Satinik or Lorraine Moreno. Many of you are inspired by the Leaders of Power, which is our interfaith community building organization. Many of you mentioned Bishop Royster, who's now working at the national level in Washington, and Mark Tyler, who's now the new head of Power, Robin Heinecke. And many of you credited your friends and your relatives for your inspiration. So to all of you and those who inspired you, I dedicate my words today. Now, I do so within the context of the Ethical Society, where we offer a non-theistic alternative to traditional religion, where supportive community and inspiring programs help people live more ethical lives. Despite what some of you may think, we are not a social justice nonprofit. Building social justice is very important to us, but here we try to do it from the inside out. From the inside out. We try to honor the worth of everyone, and we try to grow ethical relationships as we do our work in the world. And I want to stress how unique we are here. I use a 6-word mantra to sort of tell people when you don't only have that brief elevator talk and say, what you about? And I say, we're about honoring worth, growing relationships, and building justice. 3 out of 6 of those words are verbs. It's what you do. Honor worth, grow relationships, build justice. But what makes us most unique is we try to do it by coming together in a community and offering inspiration to and support to each other. To do this, to be peace activists, we need community, we need inspiration now more than ever, right? Given our politics and given our technology. One of the most premier writers of religious history, Karen Armstrong, in her book, The Great Transformation, writes, unless there is some kind of spiritual revolution that can keep abreast of our technological genius, it is unlikely that we will save our planet. A purely rational education will not suffice. So we're not just a book group. We're not just an intellectual exercise. Ethical culture is challenged to be a part of a spiritual revolution, or an ethical revolution, or a social revolution that uses compassion and reason and action to change this world. I think we have the best opportunity to do that if we're inspired to act, but we remain calm, centered, compassionate, and mindful. So my topic today is about the relationship between activism and mindfulness. I'm going to talk first about some comments about violence in all forms, international, civil, personal. Second, I'm going to explore the importance of confronting violence on all fronts so we can create a wholeness in our lives, a sense of integrity that grounds us and lets us build peace, as I said before, from the inside out. And finally, I'll discuss mindfulness, both some mindful practices and some mindful perspectives, and I hope you find some of this useful. So let me start with violence and ourselves. In trying to understand violence, whether it's international or civil or interpersonal, I want to begin by admitting that sometimes our own words are violent. My own words are violent sometimes. We try to honor the worth of individuals and grow ethical relationships, but sometimes we fail. We forget about love. We become impatient. We dehumanize. We use violent speech. So in our activism, let's begin from a position of humility. We all have feet of clay. We can be harsh towards other people, and we can be harsh towards ourselves, which is a part of the violence that we inherit in this world. I hope to do better. I hope to engage more fully in activism, and I hope to do it in a way that's mindful and compassionate. I think I do that better when I put aside guilt or shame or blame of myself or of others. And I do it best when my conscience is alert and my heart is humble. I try to remind myself to connect with those I disagree with, engaging in dialogue to understand, not dialogue to convince. Dialogue to understand. In the end, we may disagree on a lot of things, but if we can have dialogue to understand, where we do agree, we will work more effectively and compassionately. Humility are important. If our eyes are open, I think humility is actually kind of easy to get a hold of. Because despite my hopes for peace, I support institutionalized violence. I contribute to violent systems through my taxes. I pay for prisons, and I pay for bombs. And we all do. So in trying to live more ethical lives, growing ethically every day, I know that my personal habits pollute the planet and extinguish species on a daily basis. So humility is not hard to find. Put aside the guilt, the blame, and the shame, but if your eyes are open, tap the humility that grounds us. I wish our nation was more humble. I know I've talked about this before. I am proud as an American to be part of a country that has inspired the world to try to support human rights. I am proud of Eleanor Roosevelt for crafting the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. But I know we also choose war too easily. Martin Luther King said that his own government, his own country, was the, quote, greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Now, I know not everyone will agree with that statement, and that's fine, but I think we can agree that we can do better. We can be more humble as a nation, and we can search for peaceful solutions more effectively. I mean, we have a stockpile of the world's greatest weapons, and yet we're still feeling threatened. North Korea terrifies us. According to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, we're closer to nuclear war now than any time since the early 1980s. I credit diplomats who for decades have been working to minimize the threat of nuclear war, but the situation is untenable as it is now. We have to work not just to do what's possible, but to change what's possible. We have to change the paradigm on the international level. That's a huge task. Many of you work here to minimize the violence in our city, violence that's evident in our retributive criminal justice system. Just last Sunday, Inspector Love Craig had explained that policing is tough, especially when police themselves are victim of trauma, day in and day out. We need to learn to build civic peace by addressing the desperation, the fear, the anger that are the roots of violent crime. We're still learning. Militarizing law enforcement alone is not the answer. Violence often breeds violence. Fear of external threats triggers fight or flight responses and increases stress. Can we be more mindful in addressing violence between nations, in society, and inside ourselves? Violence in our heart and mind can fester subconsciously. It can arise in hostile actions or self-inflicted psychological wounds of guilt and self-doubt. But it can also arise physically in self-destructive behavior, self-deprivation, addiction. We beat up on ourselves so often, and self-destructive tendencies multiply and change how we treat each other. One author writes, when our thoughts contain negative responses like disappointment, resentment, guilt, we feel shame, we are subtly creating violence. If you can't forgive someone for something they've done against you, or if you can't forgive yourself for something you've done, this is an act of violence because it pushes love away. Even the most dedicated activists who do a lot more than me blame themselves for not doing enough. The article continues, expecting too much of yourself, putting all the responsibility in your own hands is a type of violence. You're being violent towards yourself. Stop clinging to the need to scold yourself with negative, violent thoughts. When I taught peace studies in high school, my students were intrigued about how Gandhi approached great global crises by looking in himself. Human beings internalize conflict in unproductive ways. So Gandhi practiced both self-discipline to act in the world and self-forgiveness of himself. He tried to cleanse himself of violent words, ugly ideas, and hateful emotions. Many religions do this by calling on the word ahisma. You can read about it in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, and it's basically dedication to refrain from injuring or harming any living creature, including yourself. The Jains are probably the most extreme in this regard. Some Jains don't farm because they don't want to crush a worm with their plow. Some Jains don't go out at night because they don't want to accidentally step on an insect. And some don't eat honey because it treats bees as slaves. But many who embrace ahisma as an ideal admit to degrees of harm, and some even allow for the existence of violence when it's unintended or unavoidable or prevents greater harm. Philosopher, physician, and Nobel Prize winner Albert Schweitzer studied ahisma and noted how closely it connected to Western concepts and religious commandments against killing. For him, ahisma became a lifelong commitment to what he called reverence for life. Reverence is part of mindfulness. Now, for most of us, we fall well short of this sort of commitment by Gandhi or Schweitzer. But to be as effective as we can be, to build peace from the inside out. I don't mean that you have to stop what you're doing in the world and just work on yourself. You actually have to do them at the same time. The world can't wait. There's too much suffering. Besides, we may not get that complete inner peace ever, right? We have to willingly work in the world to lessen suffering while working at inner peace in ourselves. Inner peace is about wholeness. Quite often, we can be inwardly divided. We take negative emotions or thoughts and we push them into the unconscious. But from there, they can come and affect us in ways that we cannot control. I mean, I know you cannot always control certain emotions or painful memories, but we can do a better job at bringing them into our awareness, not anxiously, without allowing them to dominate our consciousness. It takes time, it takes practice. A counselor can help with that. In the safety of a therapist's office, you can look at these negative thoughts and images without being swept away by them. You can observe them. You can say to yourself, oh, there's that anger again. There's that pain. There's that fear. In a way, you objectify them. You realize that you have these emotions. You are not the emotions. And that's the step towards being mindful and being able to take your own position towards those feelings. Gary L. Daly, in a book, Mindful Activism, The Power of Mindfulness in the Streets, writes, when we lack awareness of our thoughts and feelings, they tend to grip us and control our reactions to the world. Mindfulness creates enough mental space between that initial feeling and the tug to react impulsively so that we can respond more skillfully. When we observe these inner states and become somewhat separated from them, from our ego, these feelings become less powerful. The analogy that I like to use is that when we are being assaulted by feelings of negativity, blaming ourselves or blaming others, they're like waves that crash us and knock us off our feet every time there's a wave. And when you cultivate mindfulness, you can be a little bit more like a cork that doesn't deny the emotion, but doesn't get swept up by it. It simply rides the wave. There's that fear, there's that anger, and then rides back the crest of it. Not denying the feeling, but observing the feeling. Mirabai Bush, who has a Center for Contemplative Mind and Society up in Massachusetts, blends Eastern and Western counseling. She says that fear in particular is fundamental if we're going to figure out how to be peace activists. She says, you can't work with fear if you don't bring it to the surface. So talk to your friends about what you're feeling and bring it out in the open. Now I know one of my greatest fears, many of our all greatest fears, is the existential fear of death. And for most of us, when we go out to a protest, we're not actually afraid of being killed. But for many people without the privilege, some in this country and many people overseas, in countries where repressive regimes are ready to snuff them out in a moment, do have to confront fear to be an activist for peace. As a young boy, I remember hearing Martin Luther King's famous phrase, if you haven't found something you're willing to die for, you aren't fit to live. And I thought, boy, that's a high bar, right? From my perspective, from my comfortable life, I wrestle with that and ask myself, how much can I take on in this world? Can I put my life at risk? And at the very least, I no longer let the fear of existential mortality get in the way of my activism. In fact, it now provides stimulus for me to do what I can in the time that I have on this planet. And being more integrated, more whole, more at one with all of the feelings that are in me makes me more effective. When some of those wounds and inner divisions are healed, we become stronger. We can persevere. That's mindfulness. Christian Hayden told me that mindfulness helps him cultivate a self that is light and inviting, grounded but searching. And it's something he says he needs to do more as he grows older, but it gets harder. It takes practice. So let me talk about some practices. Engaged mindfulness, which is the only mindfulness that can exist according to Thich Nhat Hanh. You're not really mindful if you're not engaged with life. Puts action and awareness together. Mindful action also requires mindful practice. So many activists improve their effectiveness and their wholeness through physical practices that are best done when you're not under stress. If the first time you try to meditate is when you're about to be confronted by an angry protester or a police officer, it probably is not going to work. You have to choose a practice that works for you and do it at times when you're calm so you can call on that well of mindfulness when you are not calm. I do that a little bit through yoga. Once a week I go to class and I breathe deep and I remind myself to flow purposefully from one pose to another. And I look at my breath. Linda Richardson told me she does breathing exercises every evening as a way to focus herself. I do it through yoga. And it helps me be more present at that moment. So I'm not looking at the yoga as some calisthenic to get through or a task to check off my list. I try to be fully present in that moment, and slower and deeper breaths calm me and make me more aware. And when I get under stress, a single breath can bring back a little bit of that mindfulness and ground me. Staying in the moment, which is hard to do, helps Kate Esposito in her activism. Thich Nhat Hanh says we should try to be in the moment all the time, even when doing any mundane task. Many of you have read his essay on washing the dishes to wash the dishes, or how to eat an orange. Because so often when we're involved in mundane tasks, we're worrying about the future or thinking about the past, what angered us yesterday, and we're never really fully present. That's hard to develop mindfulness when you're in that state of calm. Some people simply use a mantra that they repeat in their head over and over that shows generosity, like may all creatures be joyful. Ms. Bush, who wrote this article from her Hampshire center, gave advice for people attending protest rallies. Little advice. She says transportation delays, big crowds can make people anxious. She says, so bring something like stickers or sticks of gum or food to give away to people to thank them for being a part. Little acts of generosity, just symbolic acts, can make you feel connected, make you reduce your anxiety, and make you be more fully present, not wrapped up in your own fears. Another practice, which is really important for some people who talk too much, is to listen. And not just listen to the words, but listen to how people's tone of voice is. Listen to how they are speaking. Look at their bodily presentation. And then repeat back to them what you thought you heard to ask if that's what they said. Listening deeply includes being aware of what's going on in yourself. Are you drifting? Are you angry? Are you shutting down? Is your heart open? This thoughtfulness encourages both self-knowledge, but also reflects the respect you have if you truly want to honor the worth of every person you meet. A final practice, probably the most difficult, is to learn how to be still, especially when the world is whirling all around you. Some people call it holding your seat. That means you have to be aware of what's going on around you and inside you. It's not retreating from the world. Demonstrated most dramatically at the Dharasana salt works when Gandhi's followers stood willingly taking the beatings of the police, or those on the Edmund Pettus Bridge who remained nonviolent as they were attacked. I don't think I'd have the inner strength to do that. I wish I could. I work towards it. But I know that when I get involved in situations where violence is around me and in me, holding my seat is a skill that I can go to help me do better. Let me conclude with a few mindful perspectives. The first I mentioned before is make sure that you do something to feed yourself psychically. Be good to yourself. Make sure that you refuel so you don't burn out or get brittle or resentful, which is awfully easy when you're trying to save the world, isn't it? Some people call them escapes. Sylvia likes to garden. John Marshall and Linda like to read. You need some balance with just doing things that fill you. Thich Nhat Hanh had advice that if you don't maintain a balance between our work and nourishment that we need, we won't be very successful. So walking meditation, breathing, allowing our bodies to rest, refreshes us and makes us more able to live peacefully and be an activist. Sense of humor, pretty fundamental. I think that's one of Kate's favorite tools. Because if you can laugh, you can absorb more of the world's tears. You also can avoid getting burnt out by prioritizing. Nick Sanders and Linda Richardson both said that's important to them. You cannot solve all the world's problems. Not today, at least. So prioritize. What are you going to do today? Take one thing on at a time. I told the story of this metaphor here before, but I just told it the other day of two people walking down a beach where starfish had been washed up due to a storm, and they're all on the beach slowly dying. And one of the persons bends down and picks up a starfish, and they're walking down the street, and they keep picking up one starfish, throwing it back. And his other friend looks at him and says, "What are you doing? You're not going to be able to make a difference to all these starfish." The guy bends down, picks a starfish. Made a difference to that one. Do what you can. Appreciating the big picture. Christian wrote about this. He said, "To keep me calm or level, I look at things now in 40-year terms. If I build, contribute, collaborate to birth this, what impact will it have in 40 years? What will come of it by that time? It helps me think grand and intentionally large and small. It also puts me closer with the universe's time, owning the smallness of one's life, but appreciating that it has a place in a bigger story." Where's your horizons? Where's your vista that allows you to take a deep breath and see that broader perspective? Sylvia also said that what keeps her engaged is being in close touch with people who are negatively affected by the world's isms. Classism, racism, sexism. Relatedly, Nick said that knowing how privileged he's been and how so many people have so little motivates him to act. And often being together in community like this helps us be mindful and active in the world. It's why we gather here on Sunday morning, isn't it? To live more ethical lives supported by each other. The last point I want to leave you with is that we have to choose to do good. Ultimately, ethical humanism is about choosing to act. I don't pretend to know the ultimate truths of the universe. I know too little. My time's too short. But without being too melodramatic, I choose goodness. In the midst of that ignorance and uncertainty, I choose good. Our t-shirts, "In Good We Trust." You have to make that choice to act through goodness. I'm going to conclude with some words from Eric Young. I would use less religious language, but on my better days, I share the optimism of this passage. I try to stay calm by focusing on the ultimate goal of the struggle, reminding myself of the many victories won by the civil rights struggle, I'm convinced that the future belongs to our cause and that we are fighting on the side and with the angels of a righteous universe. I am getting better on not taking things too seriously, not making sure that I spend daily moments to find space and use the Navajo principle of seeking beauty despite the disharmonies of life. As Jesus of Nazareth told his apostles, brush the negative from your shoulders and move on. As a humanist, I repeat, the choice is ours. Let's work together. Thank you very much.